The air in the Grand Lumina always smelled of old wood, beeswax, and a faint, sweet hint of magnolia, even in the depths of winter. For me, Elias Thorne, it was the scent of home, a perfume worn by the very soul of this place. I ran my hand along the polished mahogany banister, a curve worn smooth by generations of guests, and felt the cool, solid comfort of it against my palm. This wasn't just a hotel. It was a living, breathing entity, with a heartbeat as steady as the grandfather clock ticking in the lobby. Every morning, before the first guest stirred, I walked these hallowed halls. My footsteps, quiet on the thick Persian rugs, were echoes of countless others who had passed through since 1898. I knew every creak in the floorboards, every unique pattern in the stained glass windows, every story whispered by the elegant, antique furniture. This morning, a thin shaft of early sunlight pierced the high arched windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air like tiny golden fairies. It highlighted the intricate carvings on the ceiling, features often overlooked by hurried modern eyes but cherished by mine. The Grand Lumina was more than bricks and mortar. It was my lineage, my legacy, my very identity. My great-grandfather, Arthur Thorne, had poured his life savings and his fierce ambition into building it. My grandfather, Thomas, had seen it through the Great Depression, keeping its doors open even when despair shadowed every corner of the country. My father, Robert, had modernized it just enough to survive the mid-century shifts, adding air conditioning but never sacrificing its classic charm. And now it was my turn. I was the fourth generation, a custodian of history, a caretaker of dreams. I paused at the front desk, an imposing structure of dark wood and gleaming brass. My fingers traced the familiar grooves in the wood where untold numbers of guests had signed their names in weighty registers. We didn't use tablets here or digital check-ins. We used real pens, real paper, real human interaction. That was the Grand Lumina's promise, an escape from the relentless march of time, a sanctuary where history breathed and whispered. I walked into the Peacock Room, named for its vibrant, original mosaic floor. The morning light caught the iridescent tiles, making them shimmer with an otherworldly glow. This room had hosted debutante balls, wedding receptions, quiet conversations over afternoon tea, and hushed negotiations over city politics. Each event, each memory, felt imprinted into the very walls, a rich tapestry of human experience. I straightened a slightly askew painting, a landscape depicting the local river, and smoothed the tablecloths on the small, round tables, imagining the laughter that would soon fill the space. My heart swelled with a quiet pride. I wasn't just managing a business. I was nurturing a tradition, preserving a piece of American heritage. The Grand Lumina wasn't just my livelihood. It was my soul, poured into every detail, every antique, every shared memory. This hotel was a testament to enduring elegance, a symbol of a time when craftsmanship was revered and service was an art. It was my anchor, my purpose, the unwavering constant in a rapidly changing world. It was home, and I loved it with an intensity I rarely articulated, but which permeated every fiber of my being. This place, its history, its quiet majesty, it was me and I was it. The love I felt for the Grand Lumina was a profound, quiet thing, but it was also a heavy cloak. Beneath the polished facade and the nostalgic charm, the hotel carried a crushing weight, the burden of its own history in a world that no longer valued it. The turn of the century, the actual new millennium, had not been kind to places like ours. Big chain hotels, sleek and efficient, sprang up like weeds, offering amenities and prices we simply couldn't match. Our unique character, once our greatest strength, was slowly becoming our greatest vulnerability. I sat in my small office, tucked away behind the main lobby, the faint ticking of the grandfather clock a constant reminder of time slipping away. My desk was piled high with invoices. The gas bill for the massive boiler, which heated every corner of the sprawling building, was astronomical. The property taxes, reflecting the prime downtown real estate we occupied, were relentless. Insurance premiums for a structure of this age, with its original electrical and plumbing systems, were eye-watering. I stared at the numbers, a familiar knot tightening in my stomach. It was like trying to bail out a leaky boat with a teacup. Every month, it was a desperate balancing act. A careful shuffling of funds, a phone call to a vendor asking for just a little more time. Clara, my wife, had seen the numbers too, though she rarely delved into them with me. She'd glance at the ledger I'd leave open on the kitchen counter, her lips thinning into a tight line. "Elias," she'd say, her voice calm but laced with an undercurrent of something I couldn't quite place. "Are we ever going to get ahead? It feels like we're always just treading water." I'd try to reassure her, painting a picture of a brighter future. "We just need that one big convention, Clara, or maybe we can host more weddings. People love the ballroom." I'd speak with an optimism I sometimes struggled to genuinely feel, trying to conjure success into existence with sheer willpower. I believed in the Lumina, truly, madly, deeply, but belief didn't pay the bills. Clara, however, wasn't a woman for quaint hopes. She was practical, forward-looking, and I now realized, growing increasingly resentful of the hotel's stranglehold on our lives. We lived in an apartment on the third floor, a beautiful space with high ceilings and river views, but it was still the hotel. Our meals were often leftovers from the kitchen, our evenings interrupted by a guest's forgotten key or a sudden plumbing issue. Our life, our entire existence, revolved around the Grand Lumina. I remembered a conversation from last spring when we'd had a rare free Saturday. We'd gone for a drive out to the newer developments on the edge of town, where sleek, modern houses with manicured lawns stood in neat rows. Clara had pressed her nose against the car window, her gaze lingering on a particularly bright, open-concept home. "Wouldn't it be nice, Elias?" she'd murmured, almost to herself. "To have a life that's just ours. No dripping faucets in room 412. No guests complaining about the Wi-Fi being too slow for their Netflix binge," I'd laughed, a little uncomfortably. "But this is our life, Clara. The Lumina is our legacy." Her hand had dropped from the window. She hadn't said anything more, but the silence had been heavy, loaded with unvoiced dreams and unspoken frustrations. I had dismissed it, thinking it was just a passing thought, a wistful fantasy. I was so wrapped up in the hotel's survival, I missed the growing chasm between us, the slower erosion of her commitment to our shared future, a future I assumed was as tethered to the Lumina as mine was. I failed to see how the hotel, my beloved Grand Lumina, had become her cage. Then the letters started. Thick, glossy envelopes, often hand-delivered by a sharply dressed courier. They were from Sterling Holdings, a name that had begun to echo through the city's business circles like a growing rumble of thunder. Sterling Holdings wasn't in the business of preserving history. They were in the business of transforming landscapes, tearing down the old to build the new. Their vision was all glass and steel, gleaming towers and multi-use complexes. And they had their sights set on our prime downtown location. The first letter was polite, an expression of interest. The second was more direct, a surprisingly generous offer to acquire the property. The third was almost an ultimatum, detailing the hotel's declining market value and impending structural obsolescence. Thinly veiled threats wrapped in corporate jargon. I'd scoffed at them, tossing them into a drawer. "They don't understand this place," I told Clara, my voice firm. "They see square footage and zoning laws. They don't see the love, the history, the soul." Clara, surprisingly, hadn't scoffed. She'd picked up one of the glossy brochures, her fingers tracing the architectural renderings of a futuristic high-rise. $100 million, Elias," she'd said, her voice barely a whisper. "Think of what we could do with that. A quiet life. A house with a garden. No more struggling." I'd tried to make light of it. "And leave the Lumina?" "Never. It's in our blood, Clara. It's who we are." She'd just sighed, a sound so soft I almost didn't hear it, but heavy enough to weigh down the air between us. I mistook her quietness for acceptance, her silence for understanding. I believed we were a united front, fighting the modern world together. I believed she understood my passion, that she shared in the deep, ancestral pride of keeping the Grand Lumina alive. I was a fool. The pressure mounted. Each financial report was bleaker than the last. The old elevator, charmingly slow, was deemed a safety risk and required expensive upgrades. A section of the roof began to leak during a particularly bad storm, demanding immediate and costly repairs. The boiler, a beast from the 1930s, threatened to give out entirely, and replacing it would mean astronomical expense and weeks of closure. It felt like the hotel itself was slowly, deliberately trying to crush us, or at least me. Under its crumbling weight, I started to sleep less, my nights filled with restless worry. I walked the halls at odd hours, touching the cold stone walls, feeling their immense age, as if trying to draw strength from them. I even started to catch Clara on the phone, her voice hushed, retreating to the balcony or a quiet corner of the sitting room. When I'd ask who it was, she'd wave me off. A vague, just a friend, or someone about an old club membership. I'd tell myself she was just being private, that everyone deserved their own space. But the unease began to gnaw at me, a tiny, persistent worm in the apple of my content life. One evening, I overheard a fragment of her conversation. Her voice was too low to catch specific words, but I heard sterling, an offer, and a frustrated sigh. My heart skipped a beat. Had she been talking about ***? No, I told myself. She wouldn't, not Clara. She wouldn't betray the legacy, our life, my deepest purpose. The thought was so repulsive, so unthinkable, I pushed it away, deep into the recesses of my mind. It was a dark, venomous thing, and I refused to let it fester. The hotel was not just my business. It was my reason for being. The idea of losing it, of watching it torn down for some generic glass tower, was a personal annihilation. I poured all my energy, all my dwindling resources, into keeping it afloat. I cut corners where I could, delaying non-essential repairs. Doing much of the maintenance work myself, my hands calloused from years of fixing leaky pipes and stubborn door hinges. I pruned the staff, a painful decision that meant letting go of people who had been with us for decades, who understood the luminous spirit as much as I did. Each layoff felt like a small death. Another piece of the hotel's heart being chipped away. Clara, in turn, grew more distant. She stopped suggesting activities, stopped asking about my day. Her eyes, once sparkling with shared dreams, now held a cool, calculating gaze that bypassed me entirely, focused on some far-off horizon I couldn't see. We ate dinners in silence, the clinking of silverware the only sound in our spacious, antique-filled apartment. I attributed it to stress, to the relentless pressure of keeping the Grand Lumina alive. I thought she was worried for us for our future, but I was so wrong. She wasn't worried. She was planning. And the future she envisioned had no room for me, and certainly no room for my beloved Grand Lumina. The calm surface of my life was about to be shattered, and I, in my blind loyalty and love, was entirely unprepared for the tempest gathering just beneath. The first hint came on a Tuesday, a day as ordinary as any other, yet destined to be etched into my memory as the precise moment my world fractured. I was in the hotel's archives, a dusty, dimly lit room in the basement. It was a treasure trove of forgotten things, old ledgers, faded photographs of dignitaries standing on the luminous steps, blueprints for a never-built rooftop garden, and most importantly, the original property deeds and financial documents. I was searching for a specific invoice from 1952, an obscure record needed for a particularly nitpicky tax audit. Clara had been oddly insistent that morning. "Elias, darling," she'd said, her voice unusually sweet, "you look so tired. Why don't you let me handle the calls today? Take a break. Maybe go down to the archives, get lost in history for a bit. You love that." I had, in my weary state, found her suggestion touching. A break, a moment of peace. I had kissed her forehead, a brief, affectionate gesture, and headed downstairs, feeling a rare lightness in my step. The archive room smelled of old paper and dry rot. I loved it. I spent hours down there, lost in the past. After finding the elusive invoice, I started tidying up, putting away some misplaced files. That's when I saw it. Tucked beneath a stack of century-old plumbing diagrams, in a folder clearly marked Personal Clara, was a document I didn't recognize. It was thick, heavier stock than usual, and had the distinctive, official sheen of legal paper. My fingers trembled slightly as I pulled it out. Curiosity mixed with a vague sense of unease nudged me. It wasn't like Clara to have personal files down here. As I unfolded the pages, my eyes scanned the bold lettering at the top. Asterisk, asterisk, agreement for sale and purchase of real property. Asterisk, asterisk. My heart instantly hammered against my ribs. A sudden frantic rhythm. My gaze darted down the page, seeking answers, dread pooling in my stomach. Asterisk seller, Clara Thorne. Buyer, Sterling Holdings, LLC. Asterisk. The words hit me like physical blows. Each syllable was a hammer strike, chipping away at the foundations of my understanding, of my marriage, of my very reality. I read faster, my breath catching in my throat, each paragraph a fresh assault. The Grand Lumina was listed with its full legal description, the address, the parcel numbers. It was all there. A comprehensive sale agreement. The figures were staggering, the very numbers Clara had once whispered wistfully. Asterisk $100 million. Asterisk. The blood drained from my face. My hands, which had so lovingly tended to this hotel for decades, were now shaking so violently I almost dropped the papers. My eyes darted to the last page, the signature lines. Clara's elegant script was already there, bold and decisive, already signed, already dated. Asterisk 2 weeks ago. Asterisk. Below it, a blank line for asterisk Elias Thorne. Asterisk, the co-owner, the other half of the marital property. A line waiting for my unwitting consent. My mind reeled. Asterisk 2 weeks ago. Asterisk. The unusual sweetness in Clara's voice this morning. The hushed phone calls. The distant looks. It all clicked into place with horrifying clarity, a mosaic of deceit slowly revealing its full, grotesque picture. She hadn't been taking a break. She'd been giving asterisk me asterisk a break so she could asterisk finalize asterisk something. The personal folder was a deliberate attempt to keep this hidden. The archive room, a place she rarely visited, was where she thought it would be safe, buried among the dead. A guttural sound escaped my throat, half gasp, half choked sob. It wasn't just a business deal. It was an act of profound, calculated treachery. She was selling the Grand Lumina. My Grand Lumina. The legacy, the history, the very soul of my family, all of it, for $100 million and a quiet life that apparently did not include me, nor the hotel I cherished more than anything. The papers were so cold in my hands. I felt a chill spread through my entire body, a deeper, colder chill than any winter wind could produce. It was the chill of utter desolation, of betrayal so complete it felt like a physical wound, gaping and raw. I sank onto an old wooden crate, the musty air suddenly heavy, suffocating. My vision blurred. Disbelief warred with a crushing, undeniable reality staring me in the face. Clara, my wife of 30 years. The woman I had loved, trusted, shared my life and my dreams with. She was doing this. She was selling our home, my heritage, my purpose, from under my feet. And she had done so in secret, planning, negotiating, signing away everything I held dear, without a single word to me. Without a hint of remorse, the terms of the agreement flashed before my eyes. Seller warrants full ownership and capacity to convey title. Purchaser shall acquire all fixtures, fittings, and appurtenances. Closing date, 2 weeks from execution. My signature was the only thing standing between Sterling Holdings and the complete annihilation of the Grand Lumina. And if I hadn't found this, she would have simply presented it to me, perhaps with a sweet smile, and convinced me to sign. To seal my own doom, the emotional tone in the room shifted. The nostalgic warmth of the archives was replaced by a cold, hard dread. The very air felt thick with deception. My heart hammered, not with fear, but with a searing, white-hot pain. It was a pain that went deeper than any financial loss, deeper than any professional setback. This was a shattering of trust, a desecration of everything I believed in. Our marriage, our shared history, our future, it was all a lie, a carefully constructed illusion. I felt nauseous. The hotel, usually a source of comfort, now felt like a tomb, its walls echoing with the ghost of a love I thought was real. I looked at Clara's signature again, neat and precise, a stark testament to her resolve. There was no hesitation in those lines. No regret. Just a clear, decisive step towards a future that was hers alone, built on the ruins of mine. The papers in my hand felt heavy, laden with the weight of her deceit. It wasn't just about the money or the hotel, though those were monumental. It was about the utter violation of sacred bonds. The woman I had vowed to cherish, the one I trusted implicitly, had orchestrated this elaborate deception, preparing to pull the rug out from under my entire existence. The betrayal was complete, absolute, and utterly devastating. My world, once so stable and familiar, had crumbled into dust in the span of a few horrifying minutes. I was adrift in a sea of disbelief, my heart bleeding from a wound inflicted by the one person I thought would always protect it. The Grand Lumina, the heart of my life, was already sold, and I was the last to know. The moment Clara walked through the door later that evening, I knew I couldn't hold it in. The agreement, crumpled and creased from my trembling grip, lay on the coffee table between us, a stark, undeniable testament to her treachery. Her smile, practiced and brittle, evaporated the instant she saw my face, saw the papers. Her eyes widened, a flicker of panic, then hardening into something cold and defensive. "Elias," she began, her voice a forced calm, "what is this? Why are you going through my private papers?" My laugh was hollow, devoid of humor. "Private papers? Clara, this isn't a diary. This is our hotel. Our life. And you were selling it." My voice cracked on the last word, raw with pain and fury. "Selling it from under me. Without a word. $100 million for my family's legacy. For my soul," she tried to recover, her chin lifting defiantly. "It was for us, Elias. Don't you see? We're drowning. The hotel is a money pit, a relic. We could have a life, a real life, free from all this constant struggle, free from the demands of this old, decrepit building." Her voice rose, passion fueling her words, a justification that felt like a fresh stab wound. "Decrepit?" I whispered, my voice thick with disbelief. "This is our home. Our history. How could you call it decrepit?" "Because it is," she shrieked, finally breaking. Her composure shattered. "It's old, it's falling apart, and you refuse to see it. You're so blind, Elias, so obsessed with your grandfather's ghost and your father's pride." "I'm tired. I'm tired of living in a museum, Elias. I want a life, a future, where I don't have to worry about a burst pipe or a guest's complaint every single day." Sterling Holdings offered us an escape, a way out. A chance to finally be free. Free? I roared, rising from the couch, the crumpled papers still in my hand. You call this freedom? Selling out everything we built, everything I believed in, everything my family dedicated their lives to? You call that freedom, Clara? It's betrayal. A monumental, unforgivable betrayal. Our voices echoed through the high-ceilinged apartment, the sounds carrying down the silent halls of the hotel. The confrontation was brutal, raw, stripped of all pretense. Accusations flew, years of unspoken resentments erupted. She saw me as a stubborn relic, clinging to a dying dream. I saw her as a mercenary, willing to sacrifice our shared past for a future of pure, unadulterated self-interest. The argument spiraled, growing uglier with each passing minute, until there was nothing left but jagged shards of what was once our life together. By morning, the decision was made, cold and unavoidable. Our marriage, built on a foundation I now saw as entirely rotten, was over. I couldn't look at her without seeing the signature on that document, the ultimate mark of her deceit. And she, in turn, saw me as the obstacle, the last desperate guardian of a burden she wanted desperately to shed, the hotel sale. Once a secret, now became a very public spectacle. Within days, Sterling Holdings, seeing the cracks in the foundation of my ownership, swooped in. They were ruthless. Clara, still my legal wife for a few more bureaucratic weeks, leveraged her signed document against me. Citing my irrational resistance and obstructionist tendencies to a critical financial decision, she effectively ousted me from management one brisk Monday morning. I arrived at the hotel to find a new face behind the front desk. A young, impeccably dressed man, all sharp angles and colder eyes, introduced himself as Mr. Harrison, the new interim manager appointed by Sterling Holdings. He carried a clipboard with an air of clinical efficiency. "Mr. Thorne," he said, his voice flat, "your access codes have been deactivated. We understand this is difficult, but the transition needs to be smooth. Your personal effects from the apartment will be moved to storage, and a check for temporary housing will be issued." I stood there, stunned. My keys, my access, my life, gone just like that. I was escorted out by two burly security guards, men I'd never seen before, strangers in the place I called home. I walked out of the Grand Lumina, the place I had breathed life into, the place that had been my entire world, not as its owner, but as an outcast. The heavy oak doors swung shut behind me with a sickening thud, a final, definitive period on 30 years of my life. My immediate world collapsed. The small apartment they found for me was sterile, impersonal, devoid of any warmth or history. It was a stark contrast to the rich, layered existence I'd known. I spent days and a days, the air thick with despair, the silence deafening after decades of the hotel's constant hum. I stopped eating, the idea of food repulsive. Sleep was an elusive torment, my nights haunted by Clara's defiant face and the image of Sterling Holdings' name emblazoned on a construction banner. I watched, powerless and heartbroken, as the Grand Lumina began its methodical dismantling. From the street, I could see new signs appearing, harsh, temporary plastic banners proclaiming Sterling Holdings' future site, large. Menacing trucks rumbled down the street, parking near the loading docks. Men in hard hats, strangers with no respect for the building's soul, swarmed the property. They started with the exterior, stripping away the ornate ironwork from the balconies, prying off the hand-painted gold leaf from the cornices. Each piece torn away felt like a piece of my own flesh, ripped bleeding from my body. One afternoon, I saw them pull down the brass plaque bearing the name. "The Grand Lumina," it clanged to the ground with a horrifying crash that echoed in my bones. They replaced it with a plain, stark sign, "Sterling Holdings Acquisition." My eyes burned, but no tears came. There was only a vast, aching emptiness, a void where my identity used to be. The changes accelerated inside. From a small coffee shop across the street, I'd watched the procession of contractors. They ripped out the grand Persian rugs, exposing the worn hardwood floors beneath. They dismantled the historic chandeliers, piece by agonizing piece, carting them away in unmarked boxes. The beautiful mahogany banisters, the very ones I had caressed with such fondness, were covered in protective plastic, ready for removal. I saw a dumpster filled with what looked like pieces of the Peacock Room's mosaic floor, glinting sadly in the sun. Each day brought a new wound, a fresh desecration. The unique character, the timeless charm I had so lovingly tended, was being systematically erased. They weren't just renovating. They were gutting it, preparing it for an unrecognizable future. It wasn't the Grand Lumina anymore. It was just a building, a piece of real estate, stripped of its spirit, ready to be reshaped into something generic, cold, and utterly devoid of meaning. The grief was a suffocating blanket. It pressed down on my chest, making it hard to breathe. I felt utterly lost, abandoned by my wife, dispossessed of my home, my purpose, my very reason for living. The pain was a dull, constant ache, sometimes flaring into sharp, excruciating stabs of memory, a shared laugh with Clara, a quiet morning spent polishing silver in the dining room, the joy of a fully booked hotel, the pride in a guest's compliment. All of it now tainted, twisted by betrayal and loss. My life, once so rich with history and purpose, had been reduced to nothing. I was a phantom, haunting the perimeter of my former existence, watching the slow, agonizing death of everything I held dear. The despair was absolute, a black hole swallowing every spark of hope. I was Elias Thorne, a man without a hotel, a man without a wife, a man without a future. I was just an empty shell, waiting for the inevitable moment when the demolition crews would bring down the last walls, and with them, the last vestiges of who I used to be. The Grand Lumina, my beautiful Grand Lumina, was dying, and I was dying with it, powerless to stop the destruction. The bottom arrived not with a crash, but with a dull, sickening thud. I was sitting on a park bench, just a few blocks from where the Grand Lumina stood, or rather, where it was being systematically unmade. It was late afternoon, the autumn sun casting long, weak shadows. A chill wind cut through my threadbare coat. I hadn't eaten in what felt like days, only managing sips of water. My face was gaunt, my eyes hollow. Mirroring the emptiness inside me, I watched a young couple walk by, holding hands, laughing, sharing a slice of pizza. A wave of profound loneliness washed over me, a feeling so deep it was almost physical. I was alone. Utterly and completely alone. My wife, my home, my purpose, all gone. The raw grief, once a burning fire, had cooled into a heavy leaden weight. I felt nothing but exhaustion and a sense of absolute futility. I just wanted it all to end. Then, a flicker. A memory. It wasn't of Clara or of the hotel's grandeur, but of the hotel's guts. I remembered a conversation with my father, years ago, when I was just a boy, following him around with a rusty wrench. He was explaining the intricate network of pipes that carried water through the entire building, a system installed by my great-grandfather, a tinkerer and an engineer at heart. He didn't just build a hotel, Elias, my father had said, wiping grease from his brow. He built a puzzle. Every pipe, every valve, every wire, it's all custom. No two parts are exactly alike. It's a miracle and a nightmare all at once. The words echoed in my mind. Asterisk a puzzle, custom, a nightmare. Asterisk my eyes slowly lifted from the cracked pavement, focusing instead on the towering skeletal frame of the Grand Lumina, visible between the branches of the park trees. Sterling Holdings saw a building to be demolished. They saw prime real estate. They saw dollar signs. But they didn't see the puzzle. They didn't see the custom-built infrastructure, the ancient, complex systems only I, Elias Thorne, truly understood. A spark ignited in the cavern of my despair. Small at first, then growing, fanned by the bitter winds of betrayal and loss. It wasn't a spark of hope, not yet. It was a spark of something darker, colder, more determined. Asterisk retribution. Asterisk Clara thought she could sell my legacy for a quick fortune. Sterling Holdings thought they could simply tear it down and build their soulless glass tower. They thought they had won. But they hadn't counted on the heart of the Grand Lumina, and they hadn't counted on the man who knew its every secret. I straightened my back, a new kind of energy coursing through my veins. The lethargy began to recede, replaced by a simmering anger that felt almost invigorating. My despair hadn't transformed into hope, but into a grim, unyielding resolve. I would not let them win. I would not let them desecrate my family's legacy without a fight. And that fight would come from within the very walls they sought to conquer. Over the next few days, the change in me was palpable. The vacant stare was replaced by a focused intensity. The aimless wandering turned into purposeful reconnaissance. I still looked like a ghost perhaps, but a ghost with a mission. My first priority was to gather what I needed. I still had a few hidden caches, places only I knew about, small stashes of emergency cash and vital documents. Enough to sustain me, quietly, off the grid. My mind, once clouded by grief, now worked with a startling clarity, piecing together fragments of memory, old blueprints, my father's whispered instructions. The Grand Lumina was a labyrinth of bespoke engineering, a testament to a bygone era of craftsmanship and stubborn individuality. The original plumbing system, a Byzantine network of copper and cast iron, featured unique pressure valves and bypass loops. The electrical grid, upgraded in stages over a century, had its own eccentricities, a mix of old DC circuits and newer AC lines, all controlled by a master panel in the rarely accessed sub-basement. The structural integrity, while solid, relied on a complex interplay of load-bearing walls and older, reinforced steel beams, some of which were, by modern standards, a little idiosyncratic. I began to plan, meticulously, stealthily. My temporary housing was a small, dusty room in a forgotten boarding house miles away, a place where no one asked questions. I bought a cheap burner phone, untraceable. I started frequenting the local public library, poring over historical city records, old engineering textbooks, anything that might shed more light on the unique construction methods of the late 19th century. I remembered my great-grandfather had been fiercely proud of the Lumina's self-sufficiency, designing systems that could be maintained without outside specialists. That self-sufficiency was now my weapon. My revenge would be elegant, poetic. It wouldn't be a crude act of violence. It would be a symphony of structural chaos, an orchestrated dismantling from the inside out. I wouldn't destroy the Grand Lumina. I would reveal its true, intractable nature to those who sought to exploit it. I would make it so economically unviable, so riddled with unforeseen complications, that Sterling Holdings would be forced to abandon their plans. The developers, I knew, were arrogant. They would conduct their inspections, but they would be superficial, relying on modern sensor equipment and boilerplate assessments. They wouldn't understand the nuance, the history, the hidden weaknesses that only a century of intimate knowledge could reveal. I would use that arrogance against them. My planning involved hours of detailed work. I drew diagrams from memory, cross-referencing them with obscure building codes from the 1890s I found in the library. I mapped out the hotel's vulnerabilities, a specific section of the old cast-iron water main in the east wing, prone to corrosion near a little-used boiler auxiliary, a sensitive junction box in the sub-basement, where ancient wiring met newer conduits, capable of creating spectacular power surges if precisely manipulated, a concealed load-bearing pillar in the old servants' quarters, whose reinforcement could be subtly weakened without immediate detection. Each element of the plan was designed to cause maximum damage with minimal personal risk, and more importantly, to look like a series of unfortunate, unforeseeable structural failures or systemic malfunctions. Nothing overtly destructive. Nothing that would trace back to me as deliberate sabotage, at least not easily. It had to appear as if the Grand Lumina itself was rejecting its invaders, shaking them off like a persistent fever. My anger wasn't a wild, uncontrolled rage. It was a cold, simmering fire, fueling my focus. Every detail was crucial. I needed tools, specific antique tools that matched the hotel's original fixtures, tools I'd stored away in various forgotten nooks. I needed to know the inspection schedule, the weak points in Sterling Holdings security. I became a shadow, watching the hotel from a distance, observing the comings and goings of the workers, learning their patterns. The desire for retribution against Clara was still there, a sharp, bitter tang, but it was overshadowed by a more powerful, all-consuming resolve to save the Grand Lumina, to protect its soul from the soulless. This was more than revenge. It was an act of profound love, a desperate bid to preserve what I cherished most in the world. I would become the ghost in the machine, the vengeful spirit of the hotel, and I would make sure Sterling Holdings regretted the day they ever cast their greedy eyes upon my Grand Lumina. The game was far from over. It had just begun. The day arrived with a cold, insistent rain, fitting for the storm I was about to unleash. I watched from a hidden vantage point across the street, huddled beneath the awning of a closed antique shop. A convoy of sleek black sedans pulled up to the Grand Lumina's main entrance. Out stepped Mr. Harrison, the interim manager, flanked by a phalanx of Sterling Holdings executives and a team of professional inspectors. They carried clipboards, laser pointers, and a palpable air of impatient confidence. Their faces, tight and expectant, were focused solely on the acquisition, on the next phase of their empire. They saw a carcass. I saw a slumbering beast about to awaken. My heart pounded a rhythm against my ribs, a mixture of adrenaline and a cold, determined calm. This was it. Months of meticulous planning, sleepless nights poring over ancient blueprints, weeks spent observing patterns. It all culminated in these next few hours. I pulled the hood of my old jacket tighter, melting into the shadows. My target was the critical, final walk-through inspection, the last hurdle before the definitive transfer of ownership. Sterling Holdings needed this to be flawless, to sign off on the building's current structural and systemic integrity. It was the perfect stage for my performance. I had already infiltrated the hotel hours earlier, slipping in through a forgotten service entrance in the alley, a trick I'd learned from my great-grandfather. I moved like a ghost through the emptied, echoing halls, a canvas of my former life. The grand lobby, once bustling, was now draped in dust sheets, a ghostly mockery of its former glory. I carried a small, worn toolkit, its contents a collection of specialized wrenches, pressure gauges, and old electrical testers, instruments only I knew how to truly wield in this particular building. My first act was in the sub-basement, a place so obscure even the most diligent modern inspector would likely only glance at it. Here, nestled amongst the massive, dormant boiler and forgotten coal chutes, was the master electrical panel. It was a beast of a system, a century of haphazard upgrades and custom modifications, a veritable spiderweb of copper and aluminum. I located the ancient junction box connecting the original 1898 wiring to the later 1930s upgrades. With careful, precise movements, I slightly loosened specific terminals and bypassed a single, almost invisible ground wire. It wouldn't cause an immediate short, but it would create a catastrophic surge once enough power was drawn through it, especially when coupled with the older, less stable circuits. It would look like an internal failure, an overload from an aging system. Next, the plumbing. I ascended to the 6th floor, to a rarely used service corridor behind the ballroom. Here, I accessed a hidden maintenance panel for the hotel's elaborate water system. My great-grandfather had installed a series of unique bypass valves, allowing for isolated repairs without shutting down the entire building. I found the main pressure regulator for the West Wing's main water line. With a specially crafted wrench, I ever so slightly adjusted it, increasing the pressure to a critical, but not immediately obvious, threshold. It was a slow build, a silent ticking bomb. The goal was to cause a rupture in a weak section of the old cast-iron piping that ran through the ballroom ceiling, specifically near where a Sterling Holdings inspector was scheduled to review the fire suppression system. The pressure would build, and the pipe, already thinned by years of rust, would simply give way. Finally, the structural accident, deep in the former servants' quarters, a section of the hotel slated for early demolition, was a specific load-bearing pillar that I knew, from my father's old blueprints, relied on a subtle internal tensioning rod. It wasn't a primary support, but its compromise would cause a dramatic, unsettling shift in the floor above, triggering alarms and rendering the area immediately unsafe. I had, painstakingly, over several clandestine visits, used a small, specialized pry bar to subtly weaken the hidden anchoring plate, just enough that a sudden vibration or change in load, say, from a large team of inspectors moving above, would cause it to shudder and eventually crack. I positioned myself in the shadows of the 5th floor mezzanine, overlooking the grand lobby. I could hear their voices now, loud and confident, as they moved through the 1st floor offices. Harrison's smooth baritone, the sharp, authoritative tones of the lead inspector. My heart rate stayed steady. My hands were calloused from years of working on this building, and now they were precise. "All right, team," I heard Harrison say, his voice echoing slightly. "Let's move to the West Wing ballroom. We need to assess the structural integrity of the ceiling before we even think about demo." That was my cue. I pulled out my burner phone, its small, cheap screen glowing faintly. I had rigged a series of old, repurposed hotel pagers, each connected to a small, battery-operated device that would complete a circuit with a specific, carefully placed trigger. It was old tech, but robust. I typed a single, prearranged code. A low, resonant asterisk thrum asterisk vibrated through the floorboards. It was the ancient ventilation system, designed to draw air from the deepest parts of the hotel. I had activated it remotely, creating a subtle but distinct low-frequency vibration throughout the structure. It was the final stressor on the weakened pillar in the servants' quarters. A sudden, sharp asterisk crack asterisk pierced the air from below, followed by a muffled groan of stressed metal. The sound of shouting followed, then the distinct blare of a structural alarm, loud and insistent. The lead inspector's voice, now laced with genuine alarm. "What was that?" "Harrison, what the hell was that?" Panic rippled through the Sterling Holdings group. They scattered, looking for the source of the noise. I watched Harrison's face drain of color. This wasn't in the playbook. Then a gushing sound, rapidly growing louder, followed by gasps and more shouts. From the West Wing, a cascade of water began to pour from the ballroom ceiling, directly onto the expensive equipment of the inspection team. The pipe had burst exactly as planned. The water hammered down, soaking their blueprints, shorting out their electronic devices. Screams erupted as one of the inspectors was nearly struck by a falling section of waterlogged plaster. "Electrical! Shut off the power!" Someone yelled, but it was too late. The surge was coming. As the water from the burst pipe began to cascade into a junction box I had identified earlier, completing the circuit, the hotel's century-old wiring responded with a violent, dramatic protest. Lights flickered wildly, then pulsed with an alarming intensity. A shower of sparks erupted from the main lobby chandelier, raining down onto the dust sheets, threatening to ignite them. The entire building plunged into momentary darkness, punctuated by blinding flashes of light from overloaded circuits and the frantic chirping of smoke detectors. The very air smelled of ozone and burning dust. Chaos, beautiful, terrible chaos. Sterling Holdings executives were shouting, tripping over each other, trying to escape the deluge and the electrical nightmare. Harrison, his face pale and bewildered, frantically barked orders into a phone, his voice barely audible over the din of alarms and rushing water. I stood there, a ghost in my own hotel, watching my plan unfold. The defiance swelled within me, a powerful, intoxicating force. They wanted to tear down the Grand Lumina. They wanted to reduce it to a profit margin. Let them see its true cost. Let them contend with its untamed spirit. Suddenly heavy boots sounded on the stairs behind me. "Freeze, police! Don't move!" I slowly turned, my hands still covered in grease and dust from my mechanical work. 2 police officers, drawn by the alarms and the frantic 911 calls from the terrified Sterling Holdings team, stood at the top of the stairs, guns drawn, their faces grim. They had found me. I offered no resistance. I looked out over the chaos I had wrought, a beautiful, devastating symphony of structural and systemic rebellion. The burst pipes, the flashing lights, the alarms, the Grand Lumina was fighting back, and I was its champion. As the officers moved to apprehend me, I met their gaze, not with fear, but with a quiet, resolute defiance. My face, streaked with dirt and exhaustion, held a faint, triumphant smile. They could arrest me, they could charge me, but I had saved the Grand Lumina. I had ensured that it would not be a sterile monument to Sterling Holdings' greed. It would remain, for a time at least, an intractable puzzle, a glorious, defiant ruin, a testament to its own unconquerable spirit. And that was victory enough for Elias Thorne. The cold bite of the handcuffs on my wrists was a stark contrast to the triumphant warmth still lingering in my chest. The flashing red and blue lights of the police cruisers painted the rain-slicked street outside the Grand Lumina in a surreal, pulsating glow. As I was led away, soaked and smudged with grime, I caught a glimpse of Mr. Harrison, still pale, his expensive suit clinging to him, dripping wet. His eyes met mine, filled with a mixture of anger and utter bewilderment. He didn't understand, and he never would. The police station was a blur of questions, forms, and the sterile smell of disinfectant. I was charged with multiple counts of property damage, reckless endangerment, and felony sabotage. The gravity of the situation was undeniable, but even as the legal process began to churn, a strange sense of calm settled over me. I had done what I set out to do. The Grand Lumina was safe, at least for now. The next few days exploded with media coverage. "Historic hotel sabotaged during sale," screamed one headline. "Mystery man arrested after developer's disaster," blared another. The story was irresistible. An old hotel, a greedy corporation, a heartbroken owner. Soon photos of my defiant, dirt-streaked face were plastered across local news channels and online forums. The initial narrative painted me as a disgruntled, desperate man who lashed out. But as the investigation progressed, things began to shift. Sterling Holdings, in their frantic attempts to distance themselves from the catastrophic inspection, pointed fingers at unforeseen structural and systemic flaws. This, however, backfired spectacularly. Their due diligence reports, rushed and superficial, suddenly came under intense scrutiny. It became clear that they had knowingly overlooked glaring red flags in their haste to acquire prime real estate. My sabotage, while undeniable, effectively exposed their own negligent and, some argued, unethical acquisition practices. Then came the revelations about Clara. In their desperation to salvage the deal, Sterling Holdings lawyers pressed hard, trying to prove that *I* was the sole barrier to the sale. But the documents Clara had signed, the ones I had found in the archive, painted a different picture. It became evident that Clara had misrepresented the hotel's condition to Sterling Holdings, downplaying its complex, aging systems and overstating her own authority to sell the entire property without my full, informed consent. Her signed agreement, hastily executed, didn't account for a co-owner's resistance or the unique challenges of the building itself. Suddenly, Clara was no longer just the wronged wife. She was facing accusations of fraudulent misrepresentation and breach of contract from Sterling Holdings, who were now trying to recoup their massive losses from the failed acquisition. The press, initially sympathetic to her plight as a victim of my irrational behavior, quickly turned. Her carefully constructed image of a long-suffering spouse shattered under the glare of public scrutiny. Interviews with former hotel staff, once loyal to me, now revealed her growing resentment towards the Lumina and her clear desire to sell it. The public conversation shifted from my madness to her calculated betrayal. The legal battle that ensued was labyrinthine. I faced serious charges, but my lawyer, a sharp young public defender named Sarah Chun, who seemed genuinely captivated by the story, argued for a nuanced perspective. She portrayed me not as a criminal but as a desperate guardian, a man who loved his family's legacy more than life itself, driven to extreme measures by a profound betrayal and the threat of cultural annihilation. My actions, though illegal, had resonated with a powerful undercurrent of public sentiment. People were tired of big corporations bulldozing history for profit. Local historians, preservation societies, and even former guests of the Grand Lumina rallied to my cause. They organized protests outside the courthouse, carrying signs that read, "Save the Lumina!" and "Elias Thorne is a hero." I became an unlikely symbol of defiance, a quiet, stubborn man who stood against the relentless tide of corporate greed. The legal proceedings dragged on for months. I spent my days in a holding cell, then under house arrest, watching the drama unfold on the news. Clara's life, once destined for quiet luxury, became a public nightmare. Sterling Holdings pursued her relentlessly for damages, accusing her of deliberately misleading them. Her reputation was in tatters, her dreams of a new life evaporating under the weight of legal fees and public scorn. The $100 million she had dreamed of was now a phantom, a source of endless litigation and crushing debt. Eventually, a bittersweet resolution began to emerge. Due to the exposed ethical lapses of Sterling Holdings and Clara's fraudulent misrepresentation, the original sale agreement for the Grand Lumina was nullified. Sterling Holdings, facing a mountain of negative publicity and a truly unmanageable property, the accidents, had indeed rendered it economically unviable. Without massive, unforeseen costs, withdrew their acquisition altogether. They wanted nothing more to do with the cursed Lumina. The hotel was saved from demolition. It stood, scarred and partially dismantled, but still standing. It was a partial victory, a testament to my desperate actions. However, I still faced the consequences of those actions. I pleaded guilty to property damage, a lesser charge, and received a suspended sentence, community service, and a hefty fine, all mitigated by the extraordinary circumstances of the case and the public outcry. My lawyer, Sarah, argued successfully that my actions, while criminal, had ultimately served a public good by preventing the destruction of a historic landmark and exposing corporate malfeasance. I walked out of the courthouse a free man, but forever changed. The world was different, and so was I. The naive, trusting Elias Thorne was gone, replaced by a man tempered by betrayal and the harsh realities of justice. The old hotel still called to me, but I knew I could not return to manage it. The Grand Lumina was placed into a conservancy, funded by public donations and a philanthropic trust dedicated to its careful restoration. They even invited me to consult my intimate knowledge, now seen as an asset, not a burden. Clara disappeared from public life, facing her own legal battles and the crushing weight of her choices. I never saw her again. The pain of her betrayal still lingered, a phantom ache, but it no longer consumed me. My Grand Lumina stood, a little broken, a little battered, but still proud. It would live on, not as a monument to my family's private legacy, but as a public symbol of defiance, of history preserved, of the intricate and complicated nature of justice. My personal sacrifice had been immense, my journey through despair and rage a dark one, but the hotel, my heart's true home, had been spared. And in that I found the measure of peace, a quiet understanding of what it truly meant to love something, even to its bitterest end.